In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Hello, it's me, Chase. Here we are, finding the balance again. Now, why am I reading that verse, or that set of verses? That was verse 1 through 3 in John 1. And the reason why I was reading that is because today what I want to do, and the only reason I'm doing it is because I wanted to post something, and I wasn't really ready for the attributes of God yet. So I thought I would just throw something else out, something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And that is in regards to this text. Now, you could say I'm jumping the gun here a little bit with this new episode, because I was eventually going to get to the Trinity on, the things that I believe, which is the Trinity, of course. Now, I'm not going to get into really the specifics of the Trinity today, but one aspect of the Trinity. But I just figured I would just go ahead and just do this video here and this episode just because, like I said, I wasn't really ready to do attributes of God yet, and but I knew I have something here, something that I think could be useful. And also, it's my show. I can do whatever I want with it. So there you go. I can postpone whatever I want. And so there we go. Anyways, so what I'm going to do here is, I think to get through this much better, much quicker, it's always better if I have something ready to just basically read to you. But I will stop. I think I'll stop a few times just to maybe add a few comments. I wrote an article on this called Who is the Logos of John 1? Now, Logos is the Greek word that we translate into word. And it's just in John 1 here, when it says, in the beginning was the Word. Every time you read the word in John 1:1, it is in Greek the Logos. So anyways, just a little note. So one of the reasons why I've been thinking a lot about this is because I've been engaged in a lot of quote-unquote dialogue with Oneness Pentecostals. I was dragged into that group, and now I'm just kind of sucked into it. And so brings back old memories of when I would just argue with people all over the place on Facebook. I don't do that a whole lot anymore, but this is one of the areas where I kind of get into that stuff. And it's kind of nice to sort of learn about a new position that I had heard about but never really looked into, which is Oneness Pentecostalism. So it was kind of interesting, but and I've been challenged quite a bit to really make sure I understand what I believe, and that's always good to have. It's kind of like in wrestling. It's or jiu-jitsu. It's something I've been looking into a lot lately, so that's why it came to mind. But in wrestling and in jiu-jitsu, there is, pretty much anything. You got to jump on the mat, and sometimes you're gonna get your butt kicked a few times, especially when you're a beginner, I would imagine. But you start to learn. You start to learn what's good, what are good tactics, what are bad tactics, what you shouldn't do, this and that, blah 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 blah. And that's kind of the same thing here when it comes to like apologetics and knowing what you believe. This is an area, by the way, that is important for Christians to know, the deity of Christ. It's very, very essential to know the deity of Christ, but not simply to believe it just because it's a tradition, but to know why you believe it. And I hope that I can help in some sense here with that. I would be considered a very brief Greek student. I know the alphabet, and I know some words, and I know I know a few functions. I would probably pass for maybe half a year of Greek. That's pretty much it. But I do know, I know enough about just language function in general, and I know John 1:1 in the Greek pretty well. I've studied it rather extensively. So I felt pretty confident in doing this article that I wrote on my blog called, Who is the Logos? And the entire article is dedicated to just John 1:1. I originally made it to do a brief exegesis of just John 1. And when I say brief exegesis, I mean I wasn't going to do the whole thing, obviously. I mean, I couldn't do the whole thing in one article. That would take me... I don't think I could fit that in one article. That would take me 2 or 3 at least. So, but I started realizing, you know, I don't. That's a lot of information, and how many people are going to really read that? It's already long enough as it is. What I have here, I just kind of tend to go on, and you know, there you go. So I just kind of changed it to just a brief exegesis of John 1:1, and I'll probably get around to doing some other stuff later. Anyways, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of read the article, and maybe stop and start, and talk about some things about what's being said, and then also compare it to some of the debates I've been getting in with oneness people. This could count as what I believe about the deity of Christ. So, in a sense, we are sort of doing one of the series, you know, on what I believe or what we believe. You know, if you haven't seen the first one I did, which was the doctrine of creation. Oh, sorry. If you haven't seen the first one I did, which was the doctrine of creation, you can go check that out on my podcast website thingy on Podbean. Anyways, so I'm going to just begin with the article, well, where it's kind of, I'm going to skip past the introduction, just kind of get to the main section here. So here we go. I truly believe it is in John 1:1 we get the clearest expression of the nature of God in Scripture. I'm not speaking here of his attributes, for that I would say Isaiah 39 through 49 offer his majestic attributes, but rather of his nature as both plural and one at the same time. As I see it, getting John 1:1 right is key to the gospel. As Jesus says later in John 8:24, that unless we believe in the truth about who he is, we will die in our sins. Is Christ the Son the second person of the divine Trinity? Is he a God among a pantheon of gods? Is he an archangel? Is he simply another prophet? Is he a mode or title of God the Father? John 1:1 will tell us ultimately, and for this purpose we are doing this brief exegesis. By the way, all those questions and those rhetorical questions I just asked, all those questions are based off of actual views of Christ, who Christ is. You know, so is Christ the Son, the second person of the divine Trinity? That's Orthodox Christianity. Is he a God among a pantheon of gods? That would be more akin to Mormonism and Gnosticism. Is he an archangel? That would be like Jehovah's Witnesses, Watchtower Society people. Is he simply another prophet? You know, Islam believes that. Is he a mode or a title of God the Father? And that would be modalists, and particularly oneness Pentecostals. So those are all views that are actually held by people about who Christ is. So which one is he? Is which of these, you know, best describes who he is? So continuing on here, when I say brief exegesis, what I'm saying is that I am diving into the Greek of the passage, but not the entire passage, as there is so much in John 1 to unpack. It would take me numerous articles to do it. I want to focus on the question that titles this article: who is the Logos? That is what John is asking in his prologue, and that is the focus of our time here. Okay, so starting with section 1, the eternal Logos. Excuse me. There are 3 major clauses just in John 1:1 that we will have to look at. So I think it's normally broken down to, John 1:1 is usually broken down to John 1:1a, 1:1b, 1:1c, and they're divided by the clauses. So the first clause would be 1:1a. So there are 3 major clauses just in John 1:1 that we have to look at. If we miss this, we miss everything in John's gospel about who Jesus is. We begin with the first clause, which will tell us the nature of the Logos. I'm going to highlight the first clause, since that is what we will be focusing on for this section. Now, I'm going to switch over here to my screen so you can see this. Well, if you're going to watch on the YouTube, you'll be able to see it. But this right here, as you can see in the article, it's cut off a little bit here towards the end, but you don't got to worry about all that stuff, because right now we're not focusing on, you know, really anywhere but here. Just the highlighted part, which is right here, is what I'm going to focus on. And this is the first clause. This would be John 1:1a, and that is ein arche, ein hau logos. That is how you would pronounce that in the Greek. So there it is. That's John 1:1a in the Greek. So, anyways, this is John 1:1a, or whatever, John 1:1 in the Greek, which we will break down here. First, what I want to do is give a brief lesson in the language based on what I've learned so far. Many people think all they need to exegete the Greek is to find the word of interest in English, look it up in Greek, such as Strong's Concordance, and what they do is look at the root word and use that, or whichever definition comes from the root word. That's not proper handling of the Greek. Knowing a Greek word does not give you credibility with the language. This is true with any language, even English. The reality is that languages function on systemic principles. Root words change depending on how they function in a sentence. That's the same for English, and it is no different in Greek. This is important to know, especially in dealing with the cults that try to use the Greek to their advantage. We can't just zero in on one word we like. We have to see the word in its modification that determines how it's being used in the sentence, and we must also pay attention to the cases of the nouns and pronouns. That's something that's typically you'd think it'd be very basic, and it's interesting. I got in one of the recent discussions I had with a oneness lady. She tries to say that the Logos, like most oneness, they'll try to say that the Logos is this impersonal speech of God. It's just a speech. It's God's speech. It's all the Logos. That's all John's telling us. Of course, if you read all of John 1 together, there's no way you can come to that conclusion, because the Logos is later identified as the Son, and sons aren't spoken words; they are persons. Okay. So, anyways, so that's what she tried to say, and her argument, of course, was the word logos is there, and what is, and she's saying things like logos. It comes from the Greek logic, the logic of God, or the word of God, the spoken word of God. That's all it really is. It's all John is telling us. And I told her, I was like, well, what that is demonstrating is it's just a clear, and I don't mean to be mean, but just lack of knowledge of the Greek at all. No real awareness whatsoever of the Greek. And I was making the case to her, and we'll get to this later on. Actually, I should save that for later. But the point is that she doesn't recognize the noun being used as the logos, but she also doesn't recognize how it's being used in the sentence. The way it's being used cannot mean what she wants it to mean. It just can't. It's in a nominative case form, which is its root word form, by the way. So, I mean, if you say that if you're just going to use it, well, the root word here is just logos, well, you'd be correct. But again, the question is not simply what's the root word. The question is, how is it being used in the sentence? And in this sentence, it's being used as a noun, and it is in a nominative case, which means that the verbs that are being used in the sentence will be about the logos, because it is in the nominative case. That means it's the subject of the sentence. And that means all of the verbs that are going to be used and stuff like that, they're all going to be used in relation to the noun that is the subject, that is in the subject form, the nominative case. And that's what you have with logos here. So, but she said that she told me at one point that she taught English, and I'm thinking to myself, well, if you taught English, you should know this. This should be pretty basic to you. You should know that even in English, words change and they morph based on how they're being used in a sentence. He will often the word he, the noun, or the gender, I don't know. He will change to him, will change to himself, will change to his. Depending on how it's used in a sentence. You could, like there changes when depending on how it's being used in a sentence, and just all these different examples. There's tons of examples. I just use the word tons. Tons indicates plurality. Now, the root word for tons, of course, is just ton. But when I use tons, it's being used in a very different way. And so on and so forth. Every time you're speaking, you're using words that are obviously have their root forms, but they're always being modified as they're being used. This is basic for English. It's also the same for Greek. It's no different from Greek. It's no different from Latin, Hebrew, anything else. So I'm like, you said you were an English teacher. I would think you would know this. Apparently, you're not aware of it. Anyways, so continuing on. In John 1:1, a total of 5 nouns are in use. The word logos is used 3 times, theon once, and theos once. The logos is translated into the English word. Its basic meaning is messenger, speech, utterance, or reason. The word theos in the Greek root is the Greek root word for God. With the nouns identified for us in English, notice something peculiar about how we have 2 forms of the word for God in Greek. Why is logos just logos, but we have theon and theos? This is one of the points I made above, which is that we must pay attention to the modified words. The root word for God is theos. We have a modified version of theos in theon. This is because theos, while the root is also in the nominative form of theos. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I rewrote that sentence. I got a little confused. This is because theos, while the root is also the nominative form of theos. There should be a comma right there. That confused me. All right. Sorry about that. Additionally, logos is the nominative case form of logos. The nominative case indicates the subject of the sentence. That is to say, whatever the verbs or adverbs the sentence is using, they are about the noun in the nominative case. So in John 1:1, what is the subject? The logos. But we also see theos in a nominative case. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, let's see what John 1:1 is telling us about the logos. What we translate as was from John 1:1, the Greek has instead ein. This is the active imperfect form of the Greek word to be, eimi. As Dr. James White writes in The Forgotten Trinity, quote, through the prologue of the Gospel of John, the author balances between 2 verbs. When speaking of the logos as he existed in eternity past, John uses the Greek word ein, a form of eimi. The tense of the word expresses continuous action in the past. Compare this with the verb he chooses to use when speaking of everything else, found, for example, in verse 3. All things came into being through him, egeneto. This verb contains the very element missing from the other, a point of origin. The term, used in contexts of creation and origin, speaks of a time when something came into existence. The first verb, ein, does not. And that is in the Forgotten Trinity, page 50 through 51. So, with the verb ein and the logos being in the nominative case, the deduction we must arrive at is that the logos is eternal. What we can deduce, therefore, is that the logos is and always was, having been existing before creation with no origin. However, we have not finished just yet. All we know is that the logos is eternal in nature. We don't know yet if the logos is personal or what its relationship to God is. We must continue on in John 1:1. So this is the point I was going to make earlier. And it just demonstrates once again that in all due respect, a lot of these oneness folks just, I don't say it to be mean, but they don't know Greek at all. They don't have the first clue how to read Greek, but they go in there and they act like they do. Now I'm very basic in Greek, but I do know this much, so I can dabble here in this part. But I saw one of these guys saying, this Trinitarian argument for this word eimi, it's a moot point because the word eimi is just the Greek word for to exist, and that's all it is. And I read that and I went, boy. So I replied to his comments, and I quoted John 1:1 in the Greek. And I asked him a question. I said, where is eimi in John 1:1? And I never got a response back from him. Now, maybe the way I asked it, I don't know, maybe it was maybe to him wasn't a nice way to ask it, and so he just didn't want to entertain the question. Or maybe he didn't have an answer at all. And I would imagine it most likely be the latter, because if you knew Greek, you would never have said something like that. Because eimi, again, yes, it is the root form. But that's not the form it's being used as in John 1:1. So the reason why I asked him the question was because I am confident he couldn't find it in John 1:1, even though Imi is the word Imi is there in John 1:1, but it's in a different it's in a verb form. It's in an imperfect verb form. So you won't spot it right away, especially if you don't know Greek. And I imagine he couldn't find it because he doesn't know Greek. And so if you don't know Greek, you don't have any business dabbling in the Greek. Sorry. Use the English translations. I'm not saying don't use those at all and never read your Bible, but if you don't know the Greek, then just stay away from it. It's just the best thing to do. But that's the point that I've been trying to make here with some of these folks, is just that, guys, you don't have an argument here because you can't get past this, and it's just two little letters together, and that two letter word is just causing all kinds of problems, because the two letter word is the imperfect active form of Imi, to exist. It means to be in continual existence, to not have never existed. And so, in sense, again, the logos is in the nominative case. That means this verb is being used in relation to the logos. So what is that? What conclusion must you draw? If you're being honest with the text, you must conclude that the logos is eternal. The logos has always been existing. And who's the only one who has always been existing? God. So the logos is God, has always been God, has never not been God. There's this one lady in there. She's a very interesting character. Just will not accept that, and I'm about to quit that, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. It's just the reality of it. They have to want to actually know the truth, and she doesn't want to know the truth. She's got her beliefs. She's sticking with it. Nothing's going to change her mind, I guess, and there's nothing I can do about that, you can't just sit here and just pull your hair out because somebody will not accept something that you believe. It's kind of like, and I hate to pick on some of these guys, but in another group I'm in, the Irresistible Truth, there's some Lutherans in there. I've seen some Lutherans in there, pretty chill, laid back guys, but there's other Lutherans, and I think they're younger Lutherans, and so obviously younger folks, young people, I'm speaking as if I'm not one, but we tend to have a whole lot of energy, and we tend to use all that energy in all the wrong ways. Not all the wrong ways, but a lot of wrong ways. Just launching head on into something and not really thinking through it. It's only kind of later on in life when we got all the scars, we start to realize, I probably might have overreacted to that a little bit, taken that a little bit too seriously, and blah. And I just think some of these guys, man, they just get so worked up over the baptism debate. I read some of their stuff and just how obsessed they are with this subject. And it's as if these guys just don't even get any sleep. They go to bed thinking to themselves, I can't believe that Baptist said that. I can't believe they believe this stuff. I can't believe that someone's got to do something about this. And they just, they're one step away from just pulling their hair out. And at least that's what it seems like to me, because that's all they ever talk about. They've been just post after post after post about baptism. And the point is that, I look at something. I just look at that and we don't agree on this issue, and I don't lose sleep over that. I'm fine with that. I'm totally content. Why let something like this consume me? And it's the same thing with folks like this. It's kind of sad. It really is. But there's nothing I can do about it. So you just move on. It's just kind of the way it is. So anyways, moving on. The distinguished logos. So this is the next section. So now we're moving on to John 1:1b. And I will transition here real quick so you can see it. I'll highlight it here. This is John 1:1b. So it's the same verse, but it's clause number 2. Kai hau logos ein pros ton theon. That is John 1:1b in the Greek. All right, so Having finished with the first clause, which was, in the beginning was the Word, we move on to the next clause of John 1:1, and that is, Kai hau logos ein pros ton theon, and the Word was with God. That's how we would translate it. Now, if you were to do a literal translation, we would actually translate it, and the Word was with the God. But of course, in English, that doesn't make sense. In Greek, it does, but in English, not really. So we just take that last the ton out of there. It's not really necessary in English because, again, language functions. Each language has different ways in which it functions. You've just got to understand these things. You can't just pick a word and just say, well, look at that, and here's the root word and whatever, and then just throw it in there, and I've figured it out. I've solved the puzzle. It doesn't work that way. All right, continuing on. And the Logos was with God, as we would say in English. Just as with the first clause, there is one particular word here we want to zero in on that adds to what we know about the Logos. Firstly, notice the nominative case form of Logos, and then ein. Okay, Kai hau logos ein pros ton theon. We've already discussed these, hence we shouldn't need to repeat what we've already said. Instead, however, we should pay attention to pros and the accusative case form of God, theon. The word pros is a preposition which relates to the relationship between at least two parties. Its meaning is face to face or looking towards, in close proximity of, etc. Whichever of these forms we decide to go with, what must be presupposed for any of them to make sense? That we are dealing with at least two nouns. It makes no sense to say Chase was face to face with Chase. It only makes sense if I was face to face with someone else. That is, in essence, what pros is telling us here. In any instance it is used, it always presupposes two parties or agents in discussion. Thus, when the Logos is with God, what must we conclude based on the Greek? So based on what I want you to just be able to set aside all your assumptions, put them all aside, because that's what we need to be challenging ourselves with the Word of God. When I talk to these oneness folks, what I just told you makes no sense to them. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Oneness struggle with that pros word mightily. They won't admit it, but they do. Because to them, what I just promoted was polytheism. The Logos is with God, but you're saying he's separate from God, and that there are two people in discussion here. Well, that means there's two gods. See, that's how they're looking at it, because they're functioning. They have these assumptions of Unitarianism, that there can only be one person in the divine being. There can be no more. That is an assumption in oneness thinking that is just taken for granted. It's never challenged. They'll allow it to be challenged. I remember one time I was getting into discussion with a oneness guy, and he, we went back and forth on person and being, the difference between the two, and he just continues to run in these circles about insisting on the assumption. It's an assumption. It's an unchecked, unverified, and simply inconclusive assumption of a person equals one human being, or a person equals one being. He just would not jump ship on that at all. Even though I showed him in the dictionary, you can go online on the dictionary. Now, typically, often, I can pull it up here right now, actually. Dun, 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 dun. It's my version of elevator music while you're waiting. Okay, person. Yes. All right, so the first definition of person is a human being, whether an adult or child. That's typically the definition he wants to go with. Definition number 2, a human being as distinguished from an animal or a thing. Definition 3, an individual human being who likes or prefers something specified. Okay. Okay, I know what I'm talking about. 4, sociology, an individual human being, especially with reference to his or her social relationships and behavioral patterns as conditioned by the culture. So far, all of these definitions would agree with this oneness guy, that a person is tantamount or equal to a human being, one person in one being. And that's what he wants to stick with. But let's go to definition number 5. Definition number 5: a self-conscious or rational being. Where's human being in there? Where's human in there at all? Nowhere. And so I told him, when I say person, when I'm talking about the divine persons, that's more in the line of what I'm talking about. Now he wants to use 1, 2, 3, and 4 to have to work with, but he doesn't want to allow definition 5. And I wonder why he won't allow that one to fly. Well, because again, he has these presuppositions, he has these assumptions that are just going unchecked in his mind. He just will not question them. He will not allow them to be checked. And you just see the absolute double standards just going crazy. All those first 4 are fine of person, but that 5th one is not okay. That one should not even be in there, according to him. See, it's just, no matter what you do, I can show you actual evidence right there, external evidence that supports my position, and you'll just reject it because it doesn't support your presuppositions. And that's just, like I said, you gotta get to a certain point where you're just like, there's nothing I can do for you. I have shown it to you. I have led you to the truth like I lead a horse to water, but you just don't want to drink it. You don't want to do it. Nothing I can do. But anyways, so oneness just don't, like I said, that just doesn't register with them. So none of this makes any sense to them. They got to figure out for some other reason, explanation for pros in there. And I've seen some really weird stuff. It's hard to explain something because it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It just, they go all weird. They're not consistent with each other on this position. They'll say that the word was with God. But what they mean by that is that, again, like this lady I was talking about, she said the word is God's spoken word, and your spoken word is not the same thing as you. Your spoken word is with you, but it's not you. Of course, that conflicts with, 1.1c, which is the third clause we're going to get to, but don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. But what we must see here, if you're just going to follow the Greek, what the Greek is telling you, that what John is telling you is that we are talking about 2 agents, at the very least right here. 2 agents are a discussion right here. Who are these? So far, all we have for nouns are God and Logos. So the Logos is with God. The Logos is not, and really what we have to see here is, I couldn't get to all of this in this article, but really what John is doing in the prologue is he is starting. It seems like this is a theme for John. John, he does this a lot in his gospel, where he starts with giving you. It's kind of like if you're in a room that is very dark, and it has one of those knob light adjuster things, and someone just slowly turning on the lights, just slowly and slowly. As the lights slowly come on, you begin to identify a table over there. Like, oh, so there's a table there. The table's always been there, but it was always dark. You just couldn't see it. Someone's turning the lights on, so now you see in the table, and then you might see some silverware over there. You might see a couch as the light comes on more. The light comes on more. Now you're starting to see pictures, and you're starting to get them in. You're starting to see the frames and stuff like that, but can't really make the pictures out. And then all of a sudden, the light comes on even more, and you say, "Oh, that's a garden. That's a lake, or whatever. That's a family or something like that. There's some person somebody loves, a wife or a husband or a grandpa." But you're starting to see all of this stuff now because the lights are just turning on more and more. You're seeing more and more. More is being revealed to you as the light comes on. And John's doing the exact same thing in John 1. So John 1, he begins with in the dark, basically. It says, in the beginning was the Word. Well, who is the Word? What's this mysterious Word John is talking about? Well, eventually John gets to the point where he starts identifying who the Word is. And he begins to unravel the mystery here that he's proposed to us. The Word was with God. The Word is with God. I mean, what does that mean? You got to read on and see what John is talking about. Who John has in view here as the Word, and who John has in view here as God in 1.1b. In 1.1c, things change again. But again, they're not so clear. You're seeing things, so to speak, through like a glass darkly, as Paul would say. But you're seeing things in a very darkened room. Lights need to come on more. But what we know so far, what we know is that the Word is with God, and so therefore we must, in some way, shape, or form, distinguish the Word from God. In some some sense, the Word is distinguished from God. Okay? So thus, when the Logos is with God, what must we conclude based on the Greek? That John is telling us the Logos has a distinction from God. There simply is no other way to understand this in light of the preposition pros. On a final note, remember the verb ein is in this clause as well, and based on its usage in the passage, the conclusion must be drawn that this relationship the Logos has towards God is eternal. The Logos was always with God. There was never a point when the Logos was not with God. That's what John is telling us. So, what do we derive, therefore, from the second clause in relation to the first? That the eternal Logos is eternally with God, distinct from him in some manner. All right, so now we're going on to 1.1c. The Logos is God. Now for the final clause. And again, I'm going to transition here. Here is 1.1c, the final clause of John 1.1. Kai theos ein ha Logos. It's pretty short. There it is. And God was the Word. That's the literal translation. Now, we reverse those things. One of the reasons why we reverse those is because in Greek, typically in Greek, the subject would come first. Well, I mean, it's not, maybe typical isn't the right word, but there's nothing weird about the Greek people, the ancient Greeks doing that, the subject coming before the rest of the sentence. In English, we tend to not do that. That's why in English, your English translation will say, and the Word was God. It switches them around. Because we will put the subject, I might have got that wrong. In Greek, it's okay to make the subject come last. Okay, that's what I meant. There's nothing wrong in the Greek. To them, it made perfect sense to have the subject way down the line in the sentence. And this, again, here's another one of the differences between Greek and English. In English, our sentences are very, I don't know if economic is the right word. They're very orderly. Subjects usually appear in sentences based on, well, like if there's the subject or not. In Greek, that really wasn't a problem. They could have the subject way down the line. They could have it in the beginning, somewhere in the middle. It didn't really matter in the Greek, for the most part. You can have a sentence, honestly, if you were to literally, that's why you can't literally render Greek into English, because it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. It would be very confusing. But anyways, the literal rendering would be, and God was the Logos. This statement is plain and clear. The Logos is God, as most English translations put it. What's important to note here is the article how, or ho, before the Logos. That is what we often translate into English as our article, the. Ho is not present in any of the other times the nouns are mentioned in John 1:1. Why? Now, before I move on, just want to sort of show you again here. So here is ho. And in fact, let's go back up to where I have the full verse. In 1:1a, so, you have ho there again, and then you have ho again. Ho always appears, before the Logos. And it's especially important in 1:1c. We're going to find out why here. But again, so you notice that again, ho. That's the article that we would translate as the. So just want to make sure we got a bit of a picture of that. Ho is not present in any of the other times nouns are mentioned in John 1:1. Actually, it is. I don't know why I wrote that, but I got to change that. Why? Because John is being remarkably specific here, and that's why we're devoting a single article just to the first verse. John wants us to make no mistake about his meaning in any way, shape, or form. Remember what I said earlier, that nouns in the ancient languages, like Greek and Latin, often have modified case forms. And what we are seeing here are at least two kinds of noun cases. The Logos always appears in its root/nominative case form. Why? As we said, because the Logos is John's subject of the whole prologue. In the second clause, God is modified to come in its accusative form. So in the root form and the nominative form of God in the Greek is theos. But like I said, in 1:1c, or 1:1b, theos appears as theon. It appears in the accusative form. All right, so just reminder. Anyways, okay, so what we see in the final clause here is that God is also in the nominative case. What then? Which is the subject? Is this is the purpose of the article ho? So you have two nominative cases in the third clause of John 1:1. So if you have two subjects, you can't have two subjects in a sentence, right? Well, I mean, you can, but at least I would think you could. I mean, but anyways, it could be a little confusing. Okay, so how are we going to make sense? Who's the actual subject here of the verbs? Well, the way the Greek people would do it, and the way John is doing it here, is where he places the article. He places the article in front of logos, as we were going to see here. This is the purpose of the article ho. It designates the nominative it is related to as the subject. What has been the subject all along? The logos. Hence, there is no reason to suggest John changes that. The logos is the subject, and hence is made so by the article. Why do this? This is what we often call a predicate nominative construction. John is finishing 1:1 perfectly with this final clause in telling us just who the logos is, and that is God. Notice he doesn't place the article in front of God. That would turn the entire verse inside out. It would in essence say that God's essential nature is the logos. If John had no article anywhere here to distinguish between the logos and God in any way, then God and the logos become interchangeable and renders the second clause of John 1:1 utterly meaningless and contradictory to the third. This would promote the oneness modalist concept, since there is no distinction between God and the logos. The same problem occurs if John gave both nouns the article. But as I said before, John is very specific. He has a very important message that he wants you to see. The article comes with the logos, indicating that the logos' nature is the same with God. In the logos is found the fullness of deity, Colossians 2:9. In essence, John is saying the logos is the eternal God with God. So, in case you didn't really follow that, going back to the third clause here, okay, so highlighting that row just so you can see. And God was the logos. Now you notice again, see these two. This is sigma. This is the letter sigma in Greek. And when sigma appears at the end of these words, these nouns, it indicates the nominative case form of these words. I think, I'm new in Greek, so I think sometimes that changes on certain words, but we know for these two for sure that both of these are in the nominative case. So that means which one is the subject of the verb specifically here, or the which one's the subject, really, again, the subject of the sentence. John puts ho in front of logos to indicate that we're still using this is still our subject. Now if ho appeared here, that would mean that God's nature, really, in essence, because the third clause is about the nature of the logos, the essence of the logos. Who is the logos in essence? Again, the logos is God. The logos is, in other words, divine. So if ho appears before theos, that would be saying that God's essential nature was the word, and that would be completely wrong, because that would mean, what is the word in and of itself? That would mean that God himself is just a speech, right? I mean, he's not divine. He's just a speech kind of thing like that. He's a logic. God is logic, and now God is, of course, the apex of all logic and rationality, no doubt. But that doesn't make any sense with what John was saying in John 1:1. It doesn't make sense to say that all of God, or the fullness of God and the fullness of who he is in the logos, because the logos as we discover, is a person in the divine being. A subsistence. The logos is a subsistence. That is another technical word. So John wants you to know what the nature of the logos is, not the nature of God. We all know the nature of God, okay? The nature of God is deity. What John wants you to know is the nature of the logos. And so he puts the article in front of the logos, telling us that the logos is God. or the Logos was God. And again, there's that, imperfect verb form of eimi right here, ein, which indicates continuous existence and eternal. In other words, this is eternal. That's just basically what this means. So that would mean that the Logos is eternally God. Has always been God. Has the fullness, like I said, the fullness of deity. Or the fullness of deity in him, as Colossians 2:9 says. And there you have it. So, just kind of finishing up the article. Let's wrap up John 1 to end this article with what the three clauses of John 1:1 are telling us. 1, the Logos is eternal. 2, the Logos is distinct from God. 3, the Logos is God. This is the foundation of John's gospel and who the Word is. We have to be careful to keep these three clauses in mind as we continue on. You do not take these three unmistakable truths, run somewhere down the line to try and find something that contradicts them with them. John has dropped a payload on us that we simply cannot ignore. If your understanding of Jesus does not meet any of the criteria above, you have the wrong Jesus, and you will miss the entirety of the gospel. With this all in mind, we can then move on to the next article, which will be our exegesis of the prologue of John. He has much more for us to see. And indeed he does. And like I said, I'll just do a little bit of that here. And these are the areas I really want to focus on. So in John 1:1 through 3, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Who's he? He is the Word. So the Word is a he. The Word is a person. The person was in the beginning with God. So the Word was eternal. The Word is a person. The Word is eternal, and the Word was in the beginning with God. So again, with God. You don't say, like I said, you don't say Chase was with Chase. How can I be with myself? I am myself. So whenever you use that preposition, pros or with, it always indicates somebody with somebody else. So there are two persons that we are talking about here in John 1:1. Who they are exactly, we don't really know yet. He just identified one as the Word and one as God. But at the same time, John almost, not quite, but he almost interchanges two uses of God, that the Word is with God, and yet at the same time the Word is God. So we have to take all of this and put it all together. So what we conclude, therefore, is that in some sense the Word is distinguished from God, and in another sense the Word is God. The Word is divine in his nature, by the way, because he's a person, as John 1:3 tells us. There was a man sent from God whose name was John, and blah 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 blah. Now you go down to verse 14. So who is the Word? Who is the Word? Okay. Verse 14 tells us, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So who is the Word? The Word is the Son. Again, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son. So now, here's an interesting thought to consider. Oneness will often, I don't really read from the King James, and I left my iPad at work, which would have all my well, I could use my phone. Hold on here, folks. Oops. Like most cults, sorry, it's just true. Oneness like to use the King James, and they're typically King James onlyists. Now, so sometimes to kind of like what we do with LDS, the best way to dialogue with LDS is to use their preferred translation, which is also the King James. So it's the same thing with oneness. Sometimes it's better to use that. I don't, but it could help. But So oneness will. I've had oneness come back to me and say, when I say, John 1:14 identifies the Word as the Son, the oneness will say, no, it doesn't. And here's the quote in the King James, John 1:14 in the King James. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So the 14 never says, the only Son. It says the only begotten. Excuse me. And again, by the way, oneness used that word begotten to try and argue that the Word kind of came into existence at some point, which contradicts John 1:1, but okay. But see, again, when you have a particular theology that you're trying to put into the text, what John 1:1 said doesn't really matter. What matters is what something like John 1:14 says, because that can easily be used to support your view. So you start with you skip 13 verses and go down to 14, and then use 14 and read that one backwards up into. That's really what you got to do. And that's not normally how you read things, especially God's Word. But anything in general, you normally start from the top and down. It's usually how it works. But anyways, so what do you do with a oneness who tries to throw this one at you? When you say, well, see, the verse 14 identifies the Word as the Son. They go, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say it anywhere. It just says the only begotten. Well, what I found is that if you go down in the King James to 19, maybe not 19, in verse 18, sometimes you get 18 and 19 mixed together. If you go down to verse 18, verse 18 in the King James identifies who the begotten one is. No man hath seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. So, the oneness tries not to say that the Word is the Son. That's the whole point. They don't want to believe that the Word is the Son. And so they'll use verse 14. When you try to use verse 14 on them, they'll say the King James, we use the King James, and it never says that the Word took on flesh, that the Word took on flesh and he was the Son. That's not what verse 14 says. It just says the only begotten one of the Father. Well, verse 18 identifies who the begotten one is, and it's the Son in the King James. So that's something you can use there to just in case they throw. I've had that thrown at me before, and I don't know if they're the only ones who do that, but it's always good to know that, to have that in the back of your mind. Anyways, so verse 14 tells us that the Word is the Son. He is the Son, and he took on flesh. Now, when you read on again to verse 18, no one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Now, again, in the King James, there's a major textual variant here in this passage in verse 18. Some manuscripts have, let me see here. Go to John here in this, my NET Bible. I love this Bible. I think I have a bit of an idolatry problem with my Bible because I try not to crinkle the pages. I hate writing in my Bibles, highlighting in my Bibles, and I try to preserve the leather as best I can. Like one little scratch in the leather, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna die. I have a bit of an obsession with keeping my Bibles looking really nice. Except for this one, my ESV study Bible. It's a hard copy. It's nothing special about that. But when they're leather, I'm really into keeping them looking nice. I'm sorry, I can't help it. So going to verse 18. I don't know if it's this one or no one has ever seen God, the only one, himself God, who's in the closest fellowship with the Father. So the NET really tries to make it known what's being discussed there. Well, I don't want to read all this. Monogenes huios. So monogenes in the Greek means the one and only, the unique one. So that's monogenes. That's the translation. That's what it is in Greek. The no one has ever seen God, the only God. There we would say the monogenes theos. Some manuscripts say monogenes theos. Some manuscripts say monogenes huios. What's the difference between the two of those? Theos, like we've just been talking about, means God. Huios is son. So monogenes theos and monogenes huios would be fairly different. So what this ultimately resulted in is the King James says the only begotten Son, but we have it on good authority with the manuscript evidence that the reading should be monogenes theos, because the earliest manuscripts attest to that, which would be the unique and only God, which is what most modern translations, including the NET, have. And the ESV, which I just read from, has that as well. So the ESV will say, no one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Well, the King James says the only begotten Son. But point being is that you have two persons identified here, the Son and the Father. Notice, here's something to notice. Where's the Word gone? To my recollection, the last time the word is ever used of John, the last time John ever uses the word logos, is verse 14. After that, he stops using it. So he's using the term the word from verse 1 all the way to about verse 14. And then in verse 14, he identifies the word as the Son. After that, he's no longer talking about the word anymore. He calls him the Son, because John has turned the lights on. Now he's telling you who the Word is. Begins in a dark mystery. You just know that there are two persons being discussed. They have not really been identified yet. But as he turns the lights on, the term logos disappears, and now it's Son, because now John has told us who he is. He's the Son with the Father. So oneness always make this big deal about, Trinitarians are saying things like, that God in John 1:1, I think B was with God, the Word was with God. In John 1:1b, Trinitarians are always saying that God there is the Father, that the Word was with the Father, the Son was with the Father. And they're like, it doesn't say that. It never says that anywhere. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, of course it doesn't say that, because that's not John's point in 1:1. Again, the lights are dark right now. He hasn't identified exactly who they are. And it's one of the things. Oneness, like many people, cults, they want results. I want to see it right now. Give me the evidence, plain. But even though they don't really want it, because when you show it to them, they just throw it out. But John's point, again, I was talking to a oneness lady once who claimed to have formerly been a Trinitarian, and she was like, she wanted to make a big deal about John 1 again, and I remember telling her, I was like, ma'am, you don't want to go here, because I love this passage. I mean, I think it is the kryptonite of oneness Pentecostalism. I could sit here in John 1 all day. Anyways, she's making a big deal about the Word and God and everything like that. Where are the three persons here? And I was like, well, there's only two persons identified here in John's prologue. And she thought she had me in something there, like there's no Spirit here, so why isn't there three here? And I'm like, well, because John's not talking about the third spirit, the third person. He's not talking about him right now. And she's like, well, then I would think the person of the Spirit would be jealous. I'm saying, oh my gosh, guys, it's frustrating, it's sad, and it's kind of funny, because they actually think that they have an argument here. And again, I was like, for someone, you claim to have been a Trinitarian, but not even the slightest clue of what. I'm sorry, I know I'm being mean. I don't mean to be mean, but you don't know anything what you're talking about, and it shows itself in the fact that you think you got an argument, and you got nothing. The idea that because the Spirit isn't part of the discussion here means the Trinity is proven false. But no, I mean, so anyways, but they'll make a big deal about this, that there's no mention of the Father in John 1:1, no mention of the Son in John 1:1. And I'm like, well, yeah, because John is starting with kind of a very a mystery, and he goes down as he reveals more and more and more. He tells you who they are, who were the subjects of verse 1 in the first place. John has always been talking about in his gospel in his prologue of the relationship of the Son to the Father. The Son was with the Father. The Son is God with the Father. That's really the ultimate conclusion of John's prologue. That the Son is in the bosom of the Father. Not in the sense of me having a kid in my lap or something like that. That's not... Eternity is something we cannot truly fully understand, cannot truly fully grasp. And not even John, who is getting this revelation directly from God, could fully grasp it. God stoops to our anthropomorphic language to help us see in what capacity we can the truth about himself. The truth of the relationship of the Son to the Father. The truth that the Son is distinct from the Father, and yet both of them are both equally one God. How our minds can wrap themselves around that, I mean, it's just impossible. Cannot grasp that. But it just demonstrates just the wonder and the mystery of our God and how incredible he is. He is the apex of all being. And John 1 gives us an insight into that. It's a beautiful prologue of the deity of Christ, the sonship of Christ, how he is the second person of the divine Trinity. He is God with the Father. And consequently, the Spirit is God with them as well, since the Spirit is also identified as God. And then, of course, later in John's Gospel, Jesus speaks of the Spirit in third person. He doesn't, again, against oneness theology, it says that Jesus is the Spirit. In John 14, when Jesus calls the Spirit him, he's talking in third person. So if he is the Spirit, why would he talk about himself in the third person? Only weirdos talk about themselves in the third person. There you go. And so, but there is a little something on the Trinity, the deity of Christ from John 1. I hope that's useful to you guys. Like I said, I'm not a scholar on any of these things. I'm not saying I got everything right. There are a few things in that article I got to fix that I noticed as I was reading it. I apologize for that. But there you go. I hope it's useful to you in discussions with the cults and others, and just helping you understand what you believe. Soli Deo Gloria. God bless. Talk to you guys later. Bye.